Hello, everybody. Thank you, Leila, for that lovely introduction. One of the most wonderful things about the recent few years that I've had, I met so many people while I was CEO of the Bruce Trail Conservancy. It was a wonderful, wonderful journey, but meeting even more people as I've been writing this book and people who've been helping me and such. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that tonight, how I got to the Beaver Valley book that I wrote, why I love geology, and how I'm doing with the Sydenham book. Now, I have come to this club before and I've given information about geology. And so I'm going to do a little bit of that tonight. I'm going to weave it into the discussion. But it's mostly about how I've been approaching things, what I've done differently, what I really liked about what I did at the first time. And it's a little bit of a journey for all of us. So thank you so much for coming. Um, I'm going to, and I just have to say as well, like I said, I have done a presentation for the club on Niagara Escarpment geology. I was a keynote speaker during COVID, so it was a Zoom, and I talked about my life with the Bruce Trail Conservancy and my life with the Toronto Zoo Wildlife Conservancy and the things. I don't know if any of you remember that one, but what I love is that this club says, "Come on back, Beth," and what it means is I have to make up a brand new presentation. I can't just recycle the old one. I've done geology of the Niagara Escarpment a million times. I could do that one in my sleep. So I'm so happy to be here talking about something a little bit new. So we're going to start about talking about the making of walking through time in the Sydenham Bruce Trail section. Of course, it doesn't work. Okay, Brian, it's that. Okay, there we go. All right, this is an old picture, 2002, so more than 20 years ago. This is at the Cheltenham Badlands, and this was at a time before I was CEO of the Bruce Trail Conservancy. I started as the senior staff member in July of 2004, but for 12 years before that, I was on the Environment Committee of the Bruce Trail. It was called Association at the time. One of my prouder moments was changing the name to Conservancy in 2007. But we were Bruce Trail Association. I was just a little volunteer on a committee called the Environment Committee. And I joined this committee because I really wanted to do something. I knew a bit about geology. I had studied it in university. I loved the escarpment. I wanted to do something a little bit more. And they had sent out these volunteer application forms. And it turned out at the time, Ross McLean was the person who takes in the forms and sort of shuffles them off to the various committees to be reviewed and say, do you want this person on your committee, et cetera. And I didn't know Ross at the time. And I want you to know that Ross passed away, as most of you probably know, if you know Ross, a couple of years ago. But in the end, he was my champion. I count him as one of my best friends. And but at the time, I wasn't sure about this gentleman who actually corrected the spelling on my form and sent it back to me. So that's my little story about Ross. But we more than made up for it in later years. But anyway, I joined this environment committee, and I remember my very first meeting going to the committee, and I was young, 2002. Full disclosure, I was 28 years old. And, you know, volunteers at the Bruce Trail Conservancy are not 28 years old usually. And I marched into this room, and there's this tall gentleman with this shock of white hair comes up to me and says, "Hi, I'm Don Williams." And I said, "Hi, I know. Don Williams, this lovely gentleman who's standing beside me at this sign that we both created in 2002, was my high school geography teacher. He was the man who set me on this path. He was so enthusiastic. He was so vibrant. He loved to talk about landscape. He infected me when I was 14, 15, 16 years old. We went all over Southern Ontario, field trips that you can't do anymore now, but he was marvelous. And he was the one who, he didn't know it. He didn't know me from, I mean, I was one of his students, but you know, he had a lot of students, but I went into geography because of this man. And so to meet him again, it took forever for me to call him Don and not Mr. Williams, but we became friends again. So this would have been about, when I first met him again, it would be like 1993, 94. And we went all over, and our thing was, we're going to bring information to people. We're going to make them love the trail, love the land, love the geology. And one of the tasks we were given by the Bruce Trail Conservancy was to create interpretive signs at 6 Bruce Trail Conservancy properties or Bruce Trail Association properties. And so we did that, and we talked a bit about geology in some, we talked a little bit about history in others. It was great. One was at the Cheltenham Badlands, and this was the opening of that sign. I was still a volunteer. I was doing toxic chemical stuff at the time. And we opened that sign in 2002. Now that's since been removed. They've got a whole new infrastructure there because of the so many people coming to the Badlands. But what a great time. Have you been up on Skinner's Bluff? and there's a sign there. That's one of Don and my signs. So that was great, and that kind of set me on the path because Don always had a handout, and he had this really particular way of writing and drawing, and I just thought that really helped. So I always had a handout when I took people out. So I have to mention Don because he's pretty critical. And so when I became, actually it was a year before I became CEO or executive director, I started leading these hikes. I thought I was a member of the Caledon Hills Club. I was on the board of directors, and we were looking for ways to raise money, engage people. And I thought, well, I could run some hikes and maybe people would pay, who knows? And so I put out my first hike, and it was the fall of 2003. This is actually from 2004, but I couldn't find the old paperwork. And it was a hike at the Cheltenham Badlands, right? Where we had stood with the sign, because I knew a little bit about it. And I put out that there's going to be a hike there, and this is where you should meet, and this is the time. And I had 70 people come by. It was the last time that I published the meeting location in any of my hikes. I never give that out now until you've registered and I know I can control the crowds. But that started me on a path. And when I became executive director, I just continued it. I used to do about 5 hikes in the spring and 5 hikes in the fall, and I absolutely loved it. I connected with members. I met people that are in this room, Liz and Barbara and many others. And we're talking going back almost 20 years now. It was marvelous. So this is just a sample. This is actually from a year later. You can see I have a hike in the Badlands again, like what I knew all about. I talked about Wodehouse Karst. That was way before you were there, Leela, but nevertheless, I'd done that one a few times. I talked about waterfalls down in Niagara and Forks of the Credit and Cliffs and Caves. I really loved it. It was an outlet for me. I did it on my own time. I didn't charge it as work time, if you will. I raised in the 15 years I did those hikes, I raised $110,000. So pretty proud of that. I have some great pictures from those hikes. There you are, Liz. This is Liz from probably about 15 years ago. I think we're at Blue Mountain in this picture. We had so much fun. We went all over the escarpment looking at rocks. And if you like rocks, it's so nice to meet other people who like rocks, because if you don't like rocks, if that person doesn't like rocks, they think you're crazy. So, I could like look at this and look at that, and people loved it. I used to, the group, the little boy going into the crack at Wodehouse, this was a homeschool group. They'd called me up and say, could you come and lead a hike? And I'd say, sure, no problem. I'm actually getting a lot of that now with the book. I'm getting a lot of school groups saying, can you come out and do something for us? And so I do. A few more here. There's Ron showing off his sinkhole in the Glen, and just the one in the middle. I don't know if you can see this one here. That is at Woodford. That's Mother's Day, and it snowed sideways. I don't know if you remember that. It was like 2013. It snowed sideways. So, but great fun. Me admiring a rock overhang, talking at Woodford, people in Beaver Valley. It was just a really spectacular time, and I loved it. I loved the work that I was doing in preserving the land. I always tried to kind of steer our geology hikes to new lands that we were acquiring, because I thought, what a great way to get people engaged, donate, get excited about the lands that the Bruce Trail Conservancy was preserving. So that was part of my mission at the time. And yeah, I had lots of people, but I didn't have 70 anymore. I did have 56 on one hike, which was a little bit much, but we even brought out, I used to bring out hydrochloric acid, and we'd make the rock fizz, and it was really, super scientific, but a little bit dangerous as well. So there you go. And so with every hike that I did, no matter where it was on the escarpment, I did a handout. Now there's information on those handouts that would be the same for each one. If we had crevices, you got the crevice talk. If we had beautiful rock outcrops of some particular rock feature, you got that. But there were also unique parts to each hike. And so I tried to tailor them. I'd always have a map. I thought, I'm expecting people to donate. I'd really want to give them something that's worth it. So I created a lot of handouts. And so I had something like, I probably have about 90 handouts on the escarpment. These are ones that I had in the Beaver Valley section. And they formed the basis for it. So my dear, dear friend, Don Williams, back in 2005 even, so I'd only had a couple of years of these hikes under my belt. He collected all my handouts and put them in a binder. He passed away last year, just before my book came out. And I was really sad about that, because he would have been so proud. But anyway, so he collected all of the handouts and had them in a binder. He said, You should make a book. You could just put them all together. And here's the thing: when you make up a handout and photocopy it or whatever, and you give it out to people and you have a little talky talk on the trail, it can be mostly right. When you write a book, you want it to be all right. And it's a lot harder. And so he would, year after year, he'd say, "Why aren't you doing it?" But he really inspired me. The other two people that said, "You need to write a book," were Chris Walker and Ross McLean. And so I actually started writing a book on the geology of the Niagara Escarpment back in 2005. And it was the whole escarpment. I was going to write this book, and it was going to be very detailed and very thorough. And it languished. I had a lot of stuff written, but I had a lot of gaps as well. And I hadn't found my voice. I hadn't figured out how I was going to tell this story. And that's really important, because ultimately what I did is I said, "Beth, if you were standing in a forest with a bunch of people, what would you say?" That's how I wrote the book. Right? What would you say? So it really kind of brought everything back down and said, you can do this. Just say it like you'd say it out in the bush. So I was grateful in about 2015. So still CEO. And every spring for a long time, I don't know if it's still done. I haven't been paying as much attention, although I do read the magazine still. But we would have a field guide every spring. Sometimes it was ferns, sometimes it was waterfowl, it was this, it was that. And so we were like casting around, it was probably February or even January. What are we going to do for the spring magazine? And I said, "How about geology?" And my staff, I loved my staff. I still love them. Those are still there. But they're like, not sure. Anyway, I said, "I think it might be a hit." And don't you remember, I've already raised like whatever, 75,000 by then. So I said, "Now let's give this a try. Let's give it a twirl." So I wrote this article called "Escarpment Geology: Another Part of Our Living Landscape." And it's a little bit like the book that I recently published, in that I have sort of a general discussion, and then I sort of hone in on places where you can see various features. It was, as this, you can see, it's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-page spread. Nice little article. For a long time, it was on the Bruce Trail Conservancy webpage. It's no longer there. I'm a bit sad about that, because I think it's a nice overall piece, but maybe people will buy the book instead. Who knows? So I was glad to do that, because I had really been restless and what to do with all this information that I had, and I really wanted to get it out and in print. So this was kind of like a pressure valve release, right? Like, I just, okay, I've done this, so I can just park this for a little bit. So I did. And then I left the Bruce Trail Conservancy in November of 2018. So it's coming up on 5 years now. And found myself at Toronto Zoo Wildlife Conservancy. I was hired to start up a foundation to raise money. Just as an aside, we've raised $19.5 million so far. So I actually am pretty good at leading organizations. So there you are. But I had this hole that left behind by the Bruce Trail. I really, really felt disconnected. I felt I was unraveling a little bit. And I thought, okay, Beth, the whole escarpment is too much. Why don't you just start with one club section? Just one. And we'll start there. And I started with Beaver Valley for a couple of reasons. I have wonderful friends in Sydenham, don't get me wrong. I had friends in Beaver Valley as well, and Beaver Valley is a smaller section. And I thought, I can do this. I can just take a chunk. Beaver Valley Club were very good to me when I needed friends. And so I started with Beaver Valley. It was the test book. I got to tell you, the Sydenham book is going to be, this is a lovely little book. The Sydenham book is going to be even better and lots longer. But that was where I started with Beaver Valley. And suddenly it worked. And like I said, every time I got stuck as to how I'm going to frame something, how I'm going to say it, I'd say, "Beth, you're in the woods, you're looking at a rock outcrop. What would you say?" Okay, I think I can do this. But it was not easy. It was not, like I said, you've got to make it right. And I am not a researcher. I do have a degree in geology, but it's a little bit like being a doctor. Like, it doesn't, just because you have the title doctor, it doesn't mean you're a specialist in ear, nose, and throat, or you're a specialist in neurology. I really, over the years doing my geology hikes, I learned and would constantly try to find the new papers. But I really didn't want to do a bad job of this. I wanted it to be something that a real geologist could look at and go, "Yes, pretty good." I think I've accomplished that. I still get nervous when I see like, the real ones like Nick Isles, who's the god of geology in Ontario. I think, oh, I wonder what he'd say, but that's okay. I think I can stand by it. So here's the book that I did create, and it's broken up into sort of two sections. The first section is the general geological overview. So it paints the picture of how the escarpment got here, the setting, the layers that were deposited, how they were deposited, what happened with glaciation, how the landscape has changed, all that kind of thing. So that sets the stage, gives you all the background material. And then we have our 8 geology hikes. And I actually put this in the book as well. There was one method could be, I don't have to describe anything in the hikes and just say, see Amabel Goldstone, see this. And I thought, that's so super boring. So I've repeated stuff in those hikes. Sometimes I have brand new stuff written in the hikes that I don't have in the first section. It's my book. I can write it how I do. And I think it still flows pretty well. So lots of information in both sections. Some of it's new in the overview. And it has an index. And I have to tell you, the day I did the index, which was hellish, to be honest, because there really is no great program to help you with an index. But when I saw the index at the back, I went, oh, this is a real book. Because up to that point, or up to I sort of got to the end of the project, I say, I just had this little project. I'm just working on a little thing. I couldn't say I've written a book. I can actually say that now, thanks to people like Leela and many others who've really just been so fantastic. More about Leela to come. I had adventures while I was hiking. If you know the Beaver, do you know where this is, Leela? No. That's okay though. This is just leaving Fox Ridge Road at the end, going up the escarpment and turning right and going towards McCluskey's Rock. And this was me last September, actually about a year ago. And I had one more hike to do, and it was this one. Actually, no, I had a full hike to do. This was half of it. I went back to do the other half. And I am scooting along this road because it's a logging track and it's easy. And I'm thinking, and it's a beautiful day, and my dad had just dropped me off and my car's 4 kilometers away. And I just thought, this is so fantastic. And then I went airborne. I tripped over something, and I think it was a rock or a root or something like that. But I do recall being airborne, and I thought, oh, and I tucked in, and I ended up breaking a rib. I was lying on my back, and I thought, well, click. I was recording myself as I walked, so I made a little recording. But I broke a rib, and it took ages and ages to heal. And I still, every once in a while, I can kind of feel it. But I broke a rib for this book, and I just want you to know that. I plan not to break anything for the Sydenham book, but anyway, cautionary tale. And this is what the book looked like if you take all the pages and put them together. Really super proud of it. That's Webwood Falls on the cover. I do have copies at the back for sale. They're $25, no tax. Happy to sign them. You can get one now. You can contact me later. Doesn't matter. Just really proud of it. And I was so grateful that Leela, who's got a lot of photographs in the book. We'll talk a bit about photos in a minute. And Glenda Collins and others in the Beaver Valley Club really, really supported this and said, no, we're going to have a trail. We're going to have a trailside launch. And we did that. We had a little tent set up, and I led hikes, and some of you were there and signed books. It was fantastic. We'll do the same thing for Sydenham, except I'm going to rent something that has a roof, because the second day it pitched rain. I think everybody's book has little teardrop blisters on it from the rain. But it was just a wonderful reception. I am giving back a portion of the book proceeds to the club. I'm looking forward to doing that. I'll do that at the end of the year. But it's been a great project. Here's a cautionary tale, though. I had this book written by the beginning of January. And one of the places that I was going to was, I wanted people to go to a barn foundation. And on the left-hand side, you can see number 6. That's where I thought the barn foundation was. And Scott Langley, who's the Bruce Trail Conservancy cartographer and my dear, dear friend for these past 19 years, he did the maps for the book. So they look like Bruce Trail maps, and that's by design. But I said, Scott, could you just put a number there? And we'll tell people to walk down the logging track, because there's a logging track that goes right to it. It's super simple. But I thought at the beginning of January, I shouldn't do this, because the club has not been asked, and the club might be upset. And I didn't want to upset the Beaver Valley Club. They've been good to me. So I said, okay, guys, I've done this thing. I'd really like people to go see this barn foundation, but there's no side trail going to it. Now, Ron, if I had asked you, you'd probably put one in the next day. Swan, you would. I know you would. It took a little bit longer. It was January at this point. So it took about a month, and thank goodness it did. First of all, I had it in the wrong place. So there's number 6 is the barn foundation. Well, it's actually up here, and the logging track leads from a different spot. So thank goodness for that. But also, in the course of waiting for the club to establish the side trail, and just at least to get the track of it that could go to Scott so we could complete the map, the town of the Blue Mountains restricted parking at a couple of locations for my book where I told people to park. Thank goodness for me confessing to the Beaver Valley Club and the Beaver Valley Club saying, hold the presses, because I had to change for these 2 hikes. So it worked out all well in the end. I think I was done by about the middle of February. We went to print and we were ready to go in March. Had a lovely trailside book launch. I'd like to do the same here. Just great fun. Leila was there. She was my sweep on the hikes. And I think she's never gone on such a short hike in her life. But anyway, she was great. So that brings us to Sydenham. So this is the next book. And it's a very big section. It's much longer than Beaver Valley. It's actually, I think, with side trails is the longest section. Beaver Valley Sydenham and Peninsula would go back and forth in terms of total length. But it was a bit of a beast. There's also a lot more geology going on in the Sydenham section. So let's start from scratch. Okay, what do you have, Beth? You have a whole bunch of handouts. So these are handouts I had going back 15 years, 20 years almost, on the Sydenham section. Rockland Creek, one that I call Savage Wells. I don't know that Ron likes that name, but on his side trail with those wonderful holes with the water in them, I call them the Savage Wells. Silent Valley, Fossil Glen to Lindenwood. I had all these handouts. They covered an area that you can see in blue here. So, that's not too bad. I could just stick with those. But I thought, oh, there's so much to see in Sydenham. So I ended up adding a little bit. You can see a bunch of these are hot spots. So I didn't have any hot spots for Beaver Valley, but there are so many great places in the Sydenham section of the Bruce Trail that you got to see. They may not necessarily be connected or part of a big long hike, but you really need to go there. Indian Falls is one. Big Bay is another. Bruce's Caves, although you could make that into a proper hike, but it's fine as it is. Is that mine? No. Boyd Crevices. Now I've gone back and forth on that one. I think it's going to be a hot spot still. So I have these things are called hot spots now, which is new. I also added a bunch of sections to hikes to fill it in a little bit. So there's a little bit more at Esther Bluff and the new section. So I did a lot of land preservation at Kemble, but after I left the Bruce Trail Conservancy, there was some new land added. So I wanted to kind of clean that up and create some new areas. So what I ended up having now, I've got a whole bunch of linear hikes, a whole bunch of loop hikes, and a whole bunch of hot spots. That's a lot more than 8. And it's going to be great. I might even add a couple more. Sydenham Forest, I'm thinking, which is sort of in this area here. There's a recent land acquisition there. I thought, well, that would be a good one to do. Little loop, right? And maybe Hibu or Haibu would be good. We found a great fossil there, Marcia and I. So this is what the table of contents will be for the Sydenham book. It'll be much, much longer. So this is how I do it. I go out with my friends Rob and Marcia, a little bit more about them in a minute. They're my photographers. And I have the Bruce Trail app going that shows me where I am on the Bruce Trail. And I have a voice recorder. So if I get to something that's really good, I'll click the app to make a screenshot and it'll tell me exactly where I am. But the problem with the voice to text, it doesn't like terms like Amabel Dolostone and Cabot Head Shale and, dolomitization and all that kind of thing. So this is what I get in writing. 0.0 of tracking. We can see the ridge performing the low ridge. We're following on the left Fossil Helen. We're sliding around on the Cabot Head Shell on this path. And there's even layers of Annabelle up higher in the picture. So we're sliding on the Cabot Head shot and I can put something in here, but why Sheila slippery? Why is Sheila so slippery? What this means is the low ridge we're following on the left wherever I put it on the map, is Fossil Hill Dolostone, and we are walking on the slippery Cabot Head Shale layer. The Amabel Dolostone caprock can be seen higher up the slope. And then remember to put something in about why shale is slippery. So that's what that translates to. But I have pages and pages of this. It is kind of crazy. So I thought it'd be a great way to do it. It's actually almost too much information. Here's another one. I find this quite funny. Yeah, so I can Fornia crossing and leaving the field and crossing without a rider line. We enter the woods again and we enter into a lie. We enter into a lie. That's like Slippery Sheila. Another Lion's Head member, crevice him. And we said if I were making our way down my phone, I have no idea. I have no idea. Really, I don't. I know we were actually leaving the Boyd crevices and walking on the top of the field that's right next to the golf course. And then we went into another wooded area. I'm just going to rewrite it from memory. I think that's probably good enough. What's sometimes good is that I have photographs that accompany it. So I'll have my screenshot. That's what the screenshot looks like. And then I'll have a photograph. The field work here at 2.26, two beautiful boulders right on the edge of the cliff. And they are local boulders, but they may well have been put here by glacier ice. Iglesia meltwater, really quite spectacular. Not quite sure how they got here. This is me just musing, right? This is stream of consciousness. It's these beautiful, beautiful boulders that look really quite odd on the top of the bluff. And what I was speculating there, if you can read all that, is that I think they were down below the cliff and were plucked up by glacial meltwater surging up the cliff and plopped on top of the cliff. And I'm going to tell you why I think that, because we proved it a little later in the hike. I was out with Rob and Marcia, our very first hike together. They're my photographers. They were very kind. They didn't say, wow, you're crazy. We're walking along and we find this, it looks like a brick. You can come up and have a look at it later in the light. But it's a piece of rock, and somehow it just didn't look right. We're walking on the top in the forest. All of the rock is gray, Amabel Dolostone rock, old coral reef rock. And there's this funny sort of brown, thinly bedded rock. And I said, that's Manitoulin Dolostone. Manitoulin Dolostone is one of the lowest layers on the escarpment. It belongs down below the cliff. It's one of the rocks that makes that lovely spit that curves out in front of the Slough of Despond. And there's even fossils in it and the whole bit. And this could only have gotten to the top of the cliff if it was plucked up by glacial meltwater surging over the cliff and placed on top. So if it can happen to this, it can happen to those other boulders. So I was pretty chuffed by that, to be honest. Great little deductive work. Anyway, so there we are. That's kind of the way we were doing our field recording. And Marcia and Rob have taken some fantastic pictures. Oh, there's a close-up picture of one of the fossils. I think it's called Rhynconella. It's a little clammy type of fossil in the rock. Rob's cleaned it up, so we'll put it in the book for sure. So if you buy a book tonight, or if you've already got the Beaver Valley book, you might think, actually, and people have actually said this to me, why do you need another book? Isn't it the same? It's not the same. There are things that are quite different in the Sydenham section than the Beaver Valley section. So let me start. First of all, there's new bedrock layers. This is a diagram showing the layers of rock on the Niagara Escarpment at Skinner's Bluff. And Amabel Formation, Amabel Dolostone, Fossil Hill Dolostone, Cabot Head Shale, Manitoulin Dolostone, Queenston Shale. Those are layers that are very familiar and they're in the Beaver Valley. But there are actually new layers that are not in the Beaver Valley. So as we're going, all of these rock layers were laid down in a circular basin that's roughly where the Great Lakes are now. And as you go towards the middle of the basin, you're getting away from the source of the sediment, you're getting different rock layers forming. You're getting different environments. So of course they're going to change over time. And we have these two new layers. Now, what's interesting about these layers, they're not in the southern part of the Sydenham Club. They're not in Owen Sound, and they're not to the east. They start roughly Kemble area. And then they go right up the peninsula. So Dyer Bay and Wingfield Formation are on the peninsula, quite prominent, but we also get them down here in Sydenham. And just as another aside, you see these names, they look very familiar, right? Amabel and Wingfield, Dyer Bay, Cabot Head. Rock layers are named for what's called type areas. So where the rocks are studied or prominent or have really great examples, that's how they'll name them. Queenston Shale is named for Queenston Heights down on the Niagara River, for example. So these are some of the layers on the escarpment. Now, It is traditional that the escarpment starts at the Queenston Shale. And that has always been in my mantra. It's up. Queenston Shale is the lowest layer of the Niagara Escarpment. But my goodness, up in this area, we have a layer that's even lower than the Queenston Shale that's exposed. It's called the Georgian Bay Formation. And it is exposed in a little thin strip around the edge of the big bulge from Owen Sound, and on the other side as well, on the sort of the edges of the sound. It's an older layer than the Queenston Shale. It's a very fossil-rich layer. On the bottom left is a trilobite fossil that Marcia and I found at Hibu. Marcia found it. She said, "What about this, Beth? Is this any good?" Oh my goodness, it was wonderful. The middle is these beautiful starfish, brittle stars that Frank Hawley found and gave to Ron Savage. I sent this to some of my friends at the ROM who were doing research on the Georgian Bay layer, which is a fabulous layer, and they were over the moon. They'd never seen such beautiful brittle stars. And then on the far right, this is a cephalopod, a long shell, and it would have a squid in the end. And they were quite the predator, and they were around for millions and millions of years. That's at Centennial Park in the water, just under the waterline. And I thought, this is my book. I can put this layer in if I want. So I'm going to, because I think that it would be a tragedy to leave it out because it's so geologically rich, right? We're up here, we might as well look at it. So adding in some new layers to the book. We have drumlins in the Sydenham section that we don't have as many anyway elsewhere. Beautiful drums. And if you look at the picture on the right-hand side, you can see these lovely kind of whaleback looking hills. This is in the Woodford area. This is actually coming back. Rob and I and Marcia were at Rockland Creek, and we're coming back to get our car and looking towards Woodford. So you can see the lovely rolling hills. So we're going to talk about drumlins in the book and how they form and some of the newer science around them. We have beautiful ancient shoreline features in the Sydenham section. This is Leela sitting. This is one of her husband's pictures. She didn't know this was in here. There she is for scale. And that's a beautiful wave cut notch. So at one time, water was surging past there, whether it was a shoreline of a passive lake or whether it was a rushing river. I don't know the answer, but that was carved by water. Water makes those beautiful, smooth curves. We also have that old gravel beach bar down at the bottom. That's Ancient Beach. I was going to make that a hot spot. Like you stop your car and you look at the cobbles, and I thought, oh, it's so kind of boring. So I'm going to mention it in one of the write-ups and maybe leave it out as a hot spot. The map on the left is an adaptation. I found an old geology write-up of the lake levels 11,000 years ago, and it had some beautiful things in it. It showed, for example, the beach bars. If you look at the top of this map, you can see these sort of like radial patterns. Those are the old beach bars that were forming. And so I gave the base map to Scott Langley. I could do this when I was CEO, right? It's like, make me a map. And so Scott made this beautiful map up, and he put on it all of the Bruce Trail Conservancy lands at the time. Now there's a few more that can go on this map, but it was wonderfully descriptive as to the lands that the Bruce Trail Conservancy had and where those old shorelines are, and so where you'd find features that give evidence of those shorelines. So I'm hoping that Scott will update this for me for the Sydenham book. I'll have to ask him nicely, but he's been wonderful. And just full disclosure, I do have permission to ask him to do that. So sea caves. We don't have sea caves in Beaver Valley. Beautiful, beautiful sea caves. This is, of course, Bruce's Caves. Everybody knows. The pictures on the bottom are Colpoys Cavern. This is a new property that the Bruce Trail Conservancy acquired. Now, we were working on this property when I was still CEO, but I'd never been on it. And I counted up, I actually secured, under my tenure with my staff, 152 properties during my time, worth about $23 million. But I wish I'd preserved this one. I preserved beautiful, like Malcolm Bluff Shores and a whole bunch of other ones, but wow, I love this property. This is a beautiful cave because you can see on the right-hand picture, there's this beautiful crack in the ceiling. And so at one time, that crack came right down, and it was rock on either side, and the waves pounding on that rock face got in. It's almost like claws getting into that crack and ripping the rock apart and pulling it out and creating this wonderful cavern. There's also what's called speleoforms. So that's calcium carbonate that has precipitated out of the water that's dripping through the cavern and creating almost like stalactites and stalagmites. It's a wonderful, I wish I'd preserved it, but I'm glad it's preserved anyway. What is different in Sydenham? Fossils everywhere. Fossils everywhere. So here's some of the three. The one that I'm not holding are all coral fossils in the Fossil Hill Dolostone Formation, and I've done a few hikes in the Fossil Hill and Syringipora, favosites, halosite. The bottom right is a rock from Big Bay. You can go down there and you can pick them up, and there's all kinds of strange things. I'm not exactly sure what caught my eye in this. There's lots of little shells, but you can see there's a gastropod shape here, almost like an ice cream cone. Can you see that, sort of see that little shape? That's a gastropod. So that's a snail of some kind. I don't know which kind. I'll have to find out before the book is finished. But I just love the fossils in Sydenham. This is cool. So we have geological maps. I can actually use proper maps. They're pretty crusty. This is a map from like the 50s that was scanned, that was put on the internet. It's a part of a paper. Did anyone here study geography in school? A few people. Did you ever hear that what geographers do is color maps? So this is what I've been doing, is coloring maps. So I've taken these maps and I have started to, because it shows, it's like paint by numbers. It shows a number and then it corresponds with a layer. And what I love about it is I can look at it and go, oh, that's where all the fossils are going to be, because that's the yellow. I made yellow the Fossil Hill layer. So anyway, let's zoom in on this a little bit. So this is an area we're actually going to be hiking here on September 24th. That red line is roughly where we're going to be hiking. This is up at Kemble on Kemble Mountain. And on the right-hand side is the key. And I have put in my own little descriptions of some of these layers and why I like them. But the number one is at the shoreline, and each layer is on top of the next, all the way up to what's called 9C. All of the nines are the Amabel Dolostone, but they're subdivided. You don't have to worry about that right now. But I love this because it tells a really great story. But not everyone's a map kind of person. So this might actually be an easier way of looking at it. So the top right is the map. And if I drew a cross section from B to A or A to B, I'd get those layers on the bottom. Now they're exaggerated vertically so you can see them, but that's what would happen. So let's start at the shoreline. We have a little bit of Georgian Bay Formation, and it does go underneath everything, but we only see a little bit of it because the next layer starts, and that's the Queenston Shale. That's the red mud that you see often at the shoreline around Georgian Bay. And then we have the Manitoulin Dolostone little tiny cliff. So if you're driving on gray one, you're on that little cliff, quite a bit of it. And then above that, now they've combined the Cabot Head Shale, the Dyer's Bay, and the Wingfield Formation. And I don't blame them, because the Wingfield and the Dyer Bay are so subtle. They just said, okay, let's just put these all together. But you still have a layer. It's mostly covered by vegetation, so it's really hard to see. And then above that is our Fossil Hill layer. So you can see that the section that I chose has quite a wide terrace of yellow, of Fossil Hill. We're going to end our hike on that. It's just going to be fossils everywhere. It's going to be great. It has a fairly narrow, though, bit of Manitoulin Dolostone. You can see the terrace here is quite narrow. But in fact, Manitoulin Dolostone is very wide. It stretches almost from the shoreline, almost all the way to the escarpment. It's quite a wide terrace, very flat. And you know, all of that farmland below the escarpment, south of Kemble, that's all flat Manitoulin Dolostone. So then, okay, so up through the Cabot Head Shale and all those, up through the Fossil Hill, we're climbing up and we're into the Amabel Dolostone, these three sublayers. They're subtly different. It's been a bit of a challenge for me to differentiate them. And in Beaver Valley, I just said they're Amabel, but here I need to differentiate them because they're taking on different forms as we go north and west. So you can see from this map, you're climbing all the way up to the highest layers. And we're going to do a few of those layers on our hike. We're going to start up here on this gray, and we're going to go down to the yellow and finish our hike there. So having these geological maps is really quite cool. I don't know how I'm going to make it work, though, because if I take that coloring and overlay it on, say, one of Scott's map, it never quite works out perfectly. The registration is always off a little bit. And I don't know if it's worth making something slightly inaccurate that way. So I have to think about how to use these geological maps, but I think they're a lot of fun, and I think they could be a great tool. Here's another thing that I've got in the Sydenham book, because I have done a lot of geology hikes, and I think the hardest thing for people to understand is the immensity of the time. So I'm just going to do a little reading here, a pre-reading of the book to tell you a bit about this. The story of the Niagara Escarpment is a story about time, a very long period of time. So long, in fact, that it's impossible to grasp its enormity and the impact that such an expanse of time can have on our landscape. On many of my geology hikes, I've seen confusion on hikers' faces when I talk about the tropical sea that once covered southern Ontario hundreds of millions of years ago, as they try to do the mental gymnastics to connect the freshwater lakes, Great Lakes of today to that ancient sea, or try to imagine the edge of the Niagara Escarpment eroding back 100 to 200 kilometers from its original edge, or to envision the 2-kilometer thick ice sheet that would have loomed over them 12,000 years ago. I tell them to let go of the Great Lakes, of the glaciers, of all we see in our modern landscape. All of the forces that have created the geology and landscape of the Niagara Escarpment have happened over great expanses of time. A small few are measured in the thousands of years, but most measured over hundreds of millions of years. And here's the secret to the Niagara Escarpment, its formation and its landscape. With such a time span within which to work, just about any transformation is possible. So it's all about time. So if you think, how could that be? Just with enough time, you can do it. If a millimeter a year is being worn away, imagine 200 million years, how much can be worn away? This book is also going to be different in the photographs. So I mentioned to you, I've got Rob Ray, Marcia Courtney accompanying me. They take beautiful photographs and they've been amazing. They've come on almost every hike. I think they've only each missed one, and we're going to do some more this fall. I really, really miss it. They've been just amazing. I've learned so much about birds from Rob. I've learned about ferns and plants from Marcia. It's just been terrific. So this is one of my favorite pictures in the Beaver Valley book. It's a picture that Leela took, and I love it. And it's in there. I used it. But it's not high resolution enough. Now, Leela didn't know when she was taking this photograph that I'd want to put it in a book. And it doesn't have the crispness that I need. So I thought if I can get some photographers to come with me, we can get that crispness. And Rob and Marcia were totally willing. It started with Marcia and she said, oh, I think you better bring Rob along. I got a tricky knee. I might not be able to do the whole thing. She's done the whole thing. And we just had great, great fun together. So here they are. This was actually our first day out together at Skinner's Bluff and Esther Bluff, actually taking pictures. They've just been amazing to have along. And they take pictures like this. Beautiful Syringipora corals. Me talking with somebody else. That was at Woodford, I think. Marcia and I doing something. Marcia taking pictures of fossils, and they've learned a lot themselves. They can identify stuff really well as well. And they've listened to me muse because I have learned a lot about Sydenham that I didn't know before about the layers. And it's been a good journey for me. Beautiful picture of a Syringipora coral. I think Rob took that. Marcia took this lovely horn coral on the Ron Savage Side Trail. There's a gentleman who I saw on the internet who had posted some pictures of Boyd crevices, actually, named John Spine. I think his last name is actually Shapiro, but he called himself John Spine on the internet. And I contacted him and I said, can I use a couple of your photographs in my book? And he said, absolutely. He happens to have a cottage up at Rush Cove. So he's all excited to help me with the peninsula, the Saugeen Peninsula book that will be the next. So he has beautiful photographs. I also have to say how marvelous. Is Steve here? Hello, Steve, we haven't met yet. Hello, but that's one of your photographs. I saw this in February on Facebook, on your website or Facebook site, and I thought, I need to have that photograph. What a stunning example of geology, right? From drone photographs. So Steve has that one, many others as well. These are just a couple of them. Ron has offered to do some drone shots with me as well. So I think we're just going to have that slightly elevated quality of photographs. It's more than slightly in some. Yeah, that's a pun, right? Here we go. Another one by Steve. Thank you so much for these. Really great way of looking at a landscape level, because sometimes you need to see everything in context to figure it out. And so our little piece of Manitoulin dolostone would have been plucked up from down here somewhere, and surging meltwater would have pulled it right up to the top and boom into that forest. That little piece. So what's next then? The Beaver Valley book is great. The Sydenham book will be even better. And I've already begun work on the Saugeen Peninsula section. And it's pretty terrible because when I get stuck on Sydenham. I kind of go to Peninsula, and I really just need to focus on Sydenham to get it done. I think it'll be ready next spring, but spring goes all the way to June 21st. So it might be late spring. So I wrote Beaver Valley. It was about healing, about taking frayed edges and stitching them back together, making a mark saying I existed. I did good things, and here's some more good things, and saying thanks to a club that helped me. With Sydenham, I feel that this sense of relief, right? I'm tackling it with a clear mind, and I have this renewed sense of adventure. It's just been so exciting, and I've met so many wonderful people. This is one of John Spine's pictures of Boyd Crevice, and I thought if your title of your series is Walking Through Time, what a great cover for the Sydenham book. So that's going to be the cover of the Sydenham book, and it's going to be because Marcia and Rob and Steve and Ron and John and all of my geology hikers, past and present, have helped me with it. So we'll see how it goes. I have more field work to do this fall, and I'm doing a couple of hikes where I'm going to have people helping me. Right, the geology hikers that I lead are going to be doing the interpretation with me. I have a hike actually on Saturday in Collapore. That's with the Collapore Wilderness folks. They're doing one of the hikes in the Beaver Valley book. But on the 24th, I'm doing a hike at Dodds Hill that I showed you earlier. There are 7 spots left. Actually, there's 6 spots. A gentleman registered tonight. And I also have one at going from Silent Valley to Woodford. I haven't done that stretch yet. I have to walk all of the hikes that I'm putting in the book. So I have some spots left on that one as well. I have a website called walkingthroughtime.ca, and I keep it up to date, and I've got all these listed. So if you're not wanting to, if you want to take a screen or a picture of this, go ahead. But if you go to walkingthroughtime.ca, you will find these hikes. I'm going to leave you with a thought. So not everybody loves geology, right? People like all different things, trees, plants, birds, etc. And that is absolutely fine. I'm not by any means saying that everybody should love geology. Not everybody does. But I put this little piece in the book. I'm going to read it to you as well. It's not necessary to understand geology to enjoy the beauty of the landscape around us, especially the beautiful Niagara Escarpment landscape. Valleys, rivers, fossils, hills, shorelines, and cliffs are all beautiful in their own right. What's magical about geology is that it takes all those features and, like pages in a book, stitches them together to create a story. And I hope you've enjoyed my story of the Sydenham Bruce Trail section. Thank you. And I'm happy, I don't know if there's time for questions, but I'm happy to take some if there is. Lots of time. Did I go fast? Oh no, it's good. Any questions? Yes. I don't, because here's the challenge. Difficulty of hikes is all about how fast you go and the terrain. I would say all of my hikes have rocky terrain, but I don't go particularly fast. Because we're looking at things. Reason that drops me to ask. I live near Indian Falls. Yes. So-called path at Falls gets worse every year. Yeah, yeah. So it is very, when we have people come up there from the city, yeah, they start unloading their stroller. Yeah. It's not going to happen, is it? No. No, I mean, I think that you sort of have to expect that it's a geology hike. There's going to be rocks. But I don't actually rate them. I've never been a fan of the whole rating thing. It's so subjective. So I'd rather describe and then let people do the right thing. Any other questions? Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. Primarily red, but those striations of gray. I do, but I'm not satisfied with it. I've never read a satisfactory description of it. So the shale is red because it has hematite in it, which is iron rich, right? So it's oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. So the shale is red because it has hematite, iron in it, and it's rusted. That's why it goes red. The green-gray stripes are periods of time when there are anoxic conditions, so no oxygen, so therefore it doesn't rust. And when do you get those anoxic conditions? Sometimes it is the chemistry of the water. I guess it could be the chemistry of the air, but no, there'd be oxygen in the air. It's mostly water, and that's often why you see at where you had the seam between the Queenston Shale and the Manitoulin Dolostone, or the Cabot Head Shale and the Fossil Hill Dolostone. It's often green at that seam because it's creating an anoxic environment, so it's not rusting the shale. It sounds sensible, but honestly, it's been a difficult one to wrestle with, for sure. Yeah. Other questions? Okay, Bob. A lot of room up here. Thank you. Thank you.
So it's my honor to come up here and give the thank you to Beth. Wow, what a great presentation, eh?
I hope it wasn't too fast.
And you know, amazing details, enthusiastic. You know, I'm sure we've had speakers, we all have, and you wonder, well, are you really interested in this? Well, we can say for sure that Beth is really interested in her topic, and that will carry over to the books for sure. Now, it was interesting in hearing that one of Beth's champions was Ross McLean. And I knew Ross quite well. I worked on some different projects with him. He was a great leader. And it was just interesting to hear that we both have fond memories of Ross. And he was a great author too. So you're taking after him. So I've known Beth for almost 20 years. And I know she had a really great hand in some of the, in a lot of the properties that Bruce Trail has now. I liked in her presentation hearing the details about putting the book together, because, you know, you could say, oh, well, I did this here and this, but we saw the details and the thought that you had to think. And you have a quote here, you say, looking at a rock outcrop, what would you say? And I thought that was pretty good. So I noticed you're saying the book proceeds are going to go to
a portion of the proceeds, yeah.
Right.
So
yeah,
and that'll be the same with Sydenham. A portion will go to the Sydenham Club for trail work or land
right.
acquisition.
Yeah, so that's really great. The other thing I really noticed is Beth said about including haibu. Well, as most of you know, haibu is one of my pet projects, so that's really great that you're doing that. Yeah, yeah. So I'd just like to say thank you very much then for the club and for that great presentation, and thank you very much.
So much. Thanks so much.
Oh, and one other thing, we know that Beth has a summer place up by Hope Bay. So just so she'll remember tonight for the presentation, this is a handmade hook to hang at your place. Yes.
Now,
yes.
I love this book because this is the second one you've given me.
Oh, okay.
No. It's in my schoolhouse on the wall. So thank you.
So it gets a match.
Yeah, match. Thank you so much.